Madam Chair.
It is noon on September 26, 2023, and I call the Joint Assembly JSC Facilities Committee to order. I don't know if we have a copy of the land acknowledgement in here.
I'm sorry, that's
I can get it.
You can get it?
I've got it.
Okay, we will pause for just a second.
Oh, no. I was just going to read it.
You're going to read it? Okay,
Yeah.
okay, go for it. Ms. Wall will read the land acknowledgement. Thank you.
We would like to acknowledge that the city and borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous peoples of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaskan Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We're grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of Tlingit people. Sheesh.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Madam Clerk, will you call roll? And I will note that Mayor Weldon will be here in 1 or 2 minutes.
If you will give me just a moment, I'm going to consider Weldon over as a panelist.
Thank you. And you don't have to call roll, you could just note.
Okay. I will note that we are missing Mayor Weldon, but otherwise all members are present.
I will. Good to see you. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Are there any changes to the agenda as written? Are there any changes to minutes? And I have just a couple of typos, and I will pass those on to Catherine. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Thank you. We will start on F2. Ms. Kester.
Thank you. So on page 5 of your packet is a memo just summarizing the committee work for the year.
And may I interrupt? Mayor Weldon has joined us. Sorry.
Oh,
Thank you.
As you've noted, it's tradition for the chair to summarize the previous meeting at our meeting, and because we're looking at wrapping this version, the 2023 version of Joint Facilities Committee up, this memo really serves as a way for the committee to reflect on the work of the last year, but also wrap up a nice package with a bow that we would be giving to the next iteration of this committee after the election. So I'll just briefly review what's in this memo, because it is what I intend to, launch the next committee with, and that is some of the first work that you did, which was coming to a consensus on the charge of the committee as it relates to capital funding and facility maintenance. And there's a memo in your packet that you discussed at a couple of meetings. It's on the next couple of pages that talks about assembly rules and procedures. It talks about the charter, and it talks about the kind of purview of each one of the bodies and how it relates to facilities. So without any questions on that, Karen, do you want to distribute the?
No, I'll do that.
Okay, great. The next item is the next goal was to forward a strategy for addressing declining enrollment, and the first subpoint, childcare. When we did discuss childcare at the 17th meeting, I think there's some good work being done on those potentials. So while that wasn't able to be wrapped up, I know that there's ongoing work in that regard. Provide another sub goal was to provide a matrix, and you do have the draft matrix in this packet as something to adopt and then give to the next committee. Forwarding a prioritized plan for facility major maintenance for the full assembly. The 6-year capital improvement plan that JSC updates annually is still really our guiding document for that. So I think that, as the committee refines goals, that may change, but we do have a facility plan that's updated annually.
Yes, please. Yes.
Regarding this matrix, I don't see a matrix. I see words about possible categories of matrix. We did have a matrix, kind of, and last I remember, someone was gonna populate 1 or 2 schools with it and try it out. And I don't know what happened to that. Were we not gonna do that?
Right. I was just gonna say that the matrix that's here now is not what we've been looking at in the prior meeting.
That's a reference differently, that matrix is. So I think perhaps when you say are included in, oh, you do say matrix categories. Yeah.
So I'll just. to
Okay,
answer-
matrix category. You said matrix, so I was like, oh, matrix, and we don't have that. This is not the matrix, this is different.
Yeah, you're correct. We did end our August 3rd meeting with the direction to staff to start populating the matrix, and I'll work with the superintendent on 3 schools to pick for that. But with the cancellation of the September 6th meeting, we were really talking about the chair thought, starting to populate this matrix might not get us anywhere. And there's kind of a lot of staff work involved in that. And of course, you're starting a new school year, I'm starting a new job. And so
We had a yoga club.
yeah, there was a yoga club. So the chair kind of directed us to really spend the committee effort on reviewing this 2017 report. So we didn't populate any categories of the matrix, even though that is work that was assigned at the last meeting.
And I will just.
Is it gone?
No,
Please welcome the matrix from the last meeting. I know it hasn't been populated, but
no, I mean, if we, I think Katie, Ms. Kester will address that shortly. But if I could point out that the matrix categories that Ms. Kester is referring to are on pages 19 and 20,
Right.
not on page 18. So 18 is a different matrix. It's not the one that we're talking about right now.
okay.
There.
So what you don't see is a spreadsheet. You see what looks more like a
Word.
memo.
That's right.
Yes.
You see categories.
Yes, you see categories. And I expect this committee to talk about the population of those categories as part of it, as part of the next steps, but I won't get ahead of myself. Oh, no, that's where we are. The last goal for the committee was to establish a framework for future joint assembly and school facilities committee meetings. And I think, you'll see the action item, for today's agenda is to both discuss those matrix categories and adopt them, and discuss the 2017 draft JSC facilities maintenance plan. And JYW has provided some additional next steps that include the matrix. So that whatever comes of this meeting, in addition to the items mentioned, will be part of what we package up for the next version of this committee.
So my goal is for us to take the work that we've done and package that work, which is discovering this 2017 document, which has a lot of great information for the matrix, the draft matrix, the categories, take that and package that along with some recommendations for the next committee. And obviously, Madam Mayor is the person working with the school board president that would be convening that next committee, but I think we might be able to let them start much further ahead than we started, help them start much further ahead.
I'm done with my summary unless there are questions.
So does anybody have questions or additional thoughts on this summary, particularly items in red on your documents?
Just disappointment that we're not further than it seems like we've been at this exact place for at least 3 or 4 meetings. So kind of a bummer that, and I know we started from 0, kind of, but kind of a bummer that was, aren't going further. You're nodding your head.
Ms. Kester, next item, please.
All right. Next item is to hand it over to Corey Wall, and Craig's able to join us, and Mr. Erickson. And I noticed I misspelled his name, so I will correct that on the agenda, Mr. Erickson. And they have a update to the 2017 JSD facility executive summary in your packet. So what you have is an update from them that they will present. You also have the 2017 executive summary, because it's referenced in their update as an important document. And then the matrix on page 72 of this larger document is also included in your packet because it's referenced. So I'll hand it over to you, Corey.
And Mr. Erickson, thanks for joining us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so thanks for inviting us to this. It's exciting to see the report get dusted off and maybe finalized. So I was asked to just restart this a little bit. The exercise we had started in 2016. My firm, Jensen Grove, a lot at the time, was hired along with some out-of-town educational and educational funding experts to put together this facilities master plan that you're seeing there in color, and hopefully people have had a chance to look at this. And my understanding is that was fairly new information to this committee that it sort of had gotten forgotten. So I was asked to take a look at this and see if it was still relevant and how we could update it for 2023, and pretty quickly realized that there was a lot of data in here that would take a fair bit to bring up everything to current numbers, but that maybe just taking that as a 2017 document and a monument to that time was still valuable. And so instead we just prepared this 5-page overview memo. And I don't know, has this been distributed? People have kind of look at that? Great. So what we did on this was go through and see what was in here, what was still valid, and maybe the highlights of it, just to introduce it to ourselves again and also to you. So the what we saw in this was that at the time that we were asked to do the evaluation, there was already, the schools were maybe under capacity as far as students were concerned. And there was a projection that enrollments were going to continue to go down. That, of course, was 2017. So we had the pandemic. We've had a lot of things that have happened since that. And we're actually maybe at a lower point than we even thought we were going to be. And so this document has 8 sections. So the overview went through each of those 8 sections and just talked about them briefly, tried to pull out something that was, maybe the main takeaway of it, or identify if there was something radically different on that. So the first section is the executive summary, and I think maybe we will return to that at the conclusion, because the executive summary in this document actually has kind of a helpful roadmap and talks about the whole document. So section 1 we'll come back to. Section 2 was the Juneau School District budget overview. And I'm sure you know far more about that than I do, or is summarized in this document. And so we didn't redo that for 2023 numbers. Did want to point out, and I thought that it was interesting, that in 2017, 12% of the school district budget went to facilities related costs. So obviously in the different facilities, there'll be administrative costs. So it's not exactly just 12% goes to running a building. There's other efficiencies that could happen with more or fewer buildings, but I did think that that was an interesting number to just pull out and put into people's brains, that 12% is what we're talking about. Everything else is going to be staff and related far more to education than just to the facilities. And also at the time of the,
Excuse me.
yes.
So that was in 2017. Do you know what it is today?
I do not. So again, it was a fairly significant.
Okay, I just wanted.
So a lot of these we did not revisit. We just pulled out the things, except for the enrollment section 3 is where we spend our time. The other thing that was interesting about that line item was that the school district had already made significant cost reductions and energy saving efforts prior to 2017, and was not anticipating that there was going to be a much more that they could really do. And so that 12% was probably already a fairly efficient number, and probably couldn't go down even if you wanted it to. At least that's what was said in 2017. So section 3, we start to look at enrollment. And again, just to kind of get our own heads around what was happening with it. And the numbers that were used in this report came pretty much entirely from the Erickson and Associates enrollment data. So we asked Greg to come back and talk a little bit about what he was seeing in enrollment, but we also wanted to take and look at what we said was going to happen in 2017, what we were projecting to happen into the future, what actually happened in the 6 years since that report was done, and then look at where Erickson and Associates is saying we're going to go from here. Again, maybe you have this right at the tip of your brains better than I do, but I thought it was interesting that when we did the report in 2017, the population, the student enrollment was about 4,700 kids, 4,700. And we said that it was going to start going down probably, but just by, there was some different ways to take a look at it. But what actually happened was we went down by almost 500 kids in the 6 years since. Obviously, that's the pandemic. There was a big dip that came back up again, but it's still showing a declining trend. And the third paragraph under that enrollment is an interesting, the reduction of almost 500 kids from 2016 to 2022 was a significant decrease from the projections used. So there's always a 10-year projection in the Erickson and Associate report, and there's always a little bit of question, is that what's actually going to happen? And they said that it was going to go down, but not as significantly as it did, or not as much as it did. And then the future scenarios, so at this point, the new report was saying that over the next 10 years, we're going to see projected reductions of up to 700 students. And there's a high and a low and a medium, and those fade out after just 3 years, and we just take the medium. And so the medium projection is showing another decrease of 700 students.
Nice.
Yep.
Yes, this projected enrollment is a typo on the third paragraph, future scenarios, right? It says 2032, 2023.
Oh, yep.
It's 33, okay, because I was
Yep,
trying to
apologize. Thank
turn
you.
that
Yeah.
into,
That's tricky,
trying to
isn't
make that
it?
be true. Like,
Yeah. Mhm.
thank you.
So many numbers.
So many numbers.
And I think then the other thing that, and I'll let Greg talk here in a minute, but his enrollment is based on birth rates and also what we're seeing at the other grades in school. And so it's difficult to really imagine different futures for Juneau within these enrollment numbers. And so something that the CJ asked me to do was think about, is there things that are going to happen that would radically change these enrollment numbers? And I don't want to speak for Greg, but I think that's difficult for somebody with a true background in statistics to do. And so I took a whack at it because, you know, we're angel spirited tread, right? And so I talked a little bit with JDC and tried to imagine, well, are there things like the icebreaker coming to town, or, you know, as the housing market starts to free up, are there ways that all of a sudden we would revert back to even better than 2017 or 2017 numbers? Very difficult to put any sort of numbers to that. But one thing that I did want to just think was interesting is the projection for the icebreaker alone is 300 families coming to town, or 300 crew members coming to town. So if you imagine that was 300 families, and every family had an average of 1 kid, that's 300. Just to put some round numbers at it, and we've lost 500 since 2017. So what we said here was we thought that the numbers that were shown in 2017 were still interesting, because even then we were not at capacity. And so there probably isn't something that's going to happen in the immediate future that takes us back to the 2017 numbers, or completely reverses this trend in the immediate future. Just it's not on anybody's radar that what would turn this completely around in the near future. So yeah, thank you.
The future scenarios paragraph, projected reductions of 700 students over the next 10 years. Is that 700 from now or 700 from 2016?
Correct. From now.
700. Okay.
From now. So that's why we're saying that that's in
Yeah.
2033.
There, well then.
I don't know if Corey can answer, sorry, Mr. Wall is Mr. some school board. How many kids do you know we have that are in some kind of correspondence program? Is there enough in that group to evaluate these numbers, or is that not?
Mr. Howard?
Yeah.
Sorry, Superintendent of Service.
No, it's fine. Yes, sir, Mayor's question. Right now we have 183 students in Homebridge.
No, I'm not counting Homebridge because that's school district. How many kids do we have in town that are doing something else?
Oh, so doing like Raven, IDEA,
Yeah.
non-JSD.
Do we have any kind of
I don't know. It's hard to kind of pinpoint exactly where and how to pull those numbers.
They're not forthcoming with those numbers.
Yeah.
Who's they? The people that do it, or the
Raven and
The
IDEA.
correspondence programs that are non-JSD.
But just looking at the kids that graduated, you probably see about 20 maybe. Just looking at the signs around town. Yeah.
I would have to go back. I wasn't here in May, so I wasn't able to see the signs, you know, but I would have to go back and look. And there are potentially some ways that we can try to get close averages of what those numbers might look like.
But we're not counting hundreds of kids.
I just don't hesitate to say yes or no on that. I don't think we're counting hundreds of kids, but again, I have to go back and try to find a way, like I said, they're not forthcoming with the information.
I would say this
I'm sorry,
Give it-
but not,
But like a guess, 100, 200, 500?
I would guess that there's probably at least 50 in each one of those programs.
and this is borne out nationally. There's been a big shift, post-pandemic.
And it's impossible to tell with, you know, the other homeschool varieties that don't receive any state.
Darryl, did you have some
Well,
thoughts?
just the reason for my question is, you know, icebreakers one thing, but if we can get other kids to come back, I just don't know if that would be significant.
This
Doesn't sound like it is.
So when you say, these other programs get state, I thought they did get state money. Because those numbers we should be able to get if they got state money, right? Or even in those things, so we get those numbers from the state. No.
Yeah.
The state doesn't get it.
And
Okay, that's,
No, but
that's
not,
weird because it's
well, but in order to get state money, you have to select a homeschool program that's state approved. And there are families that choose homeschool programs that are not state approved, so they don't receive state money.
I understand that, but
And
they
I
get
mean,
state
and
money, they should
that's-
get state.
That's a particular group of
Statistics.
families.
you can,
Is it, I mean, why is that confidential?
you can get like the enrollment numbers for Raven correspondence, but a breakdown of number of students that are in the Juneau area or number of students that are in the Cambridge area. You know, that's where it's a little tricky trying to identify and pull out those numbers. And you'd be able to get, if you could get the numbers, you'd be able to get a great idea. But like Mr. Sorensen said, you have private schools that aren't reporting the information, and you have some students that are participating in virtual programs out of the state too.
Thanks.
So maybe this is a good opportunity to turn this over to Mr. Erickson and just, so you can supplement what I said here, and if you think that I've missed anything, please correct me.
Mr. Erickson, thanks so much for being here. You are muted.
Yeah, I think I got it now. Can you
Okay,
hear me?
Yes.
Let me first say that I have a great deal of difficulty hearing you. I can hear Mr. Wall, but everybody else sounds like they're speaking in a barrel of fish. So bear in mind, if you have any questions, maybe you should relay them through him.
We're closing some windows.
I have been doing the forecast for the Juneau School District, the enrollment forecast, for 10 years now. And every year, I think we've gotten better and better in our short-term forecasts. The forecast, the primary use, I think, of our forecast is to help with the forecasting the foundation program revenues to the district. And those depend on next year's enrollment. And I think we've done a pretty good job with that. And every year we show our accuracy statistics going back for years and years, and they've, I think, gotten better. But every year we also are requested by the school district and have prepared a 10-year forecast, a long-term forecast. And if there's anything that causes an economic forecaster to be humble, it's looking at that long-term forecasts and how they've played out in reality. And I think that every year we've become more humble in looking at those long-term forecasts. And you'll notice, or probably won't notice, but we stopped doing a high and low forecast for the long term because it turned out those confidence intervals were routinely violated by reality. But first of all, let me say, second of all, let me say that Mr. Wall has done a good job of summarizing the numbers in section 3. I've checked them all out and they do check out. Let me go over them again, give you basically 10 numbers that I think sort of encapsulates where we've been and where we think we're going. In 2016, we had, which was the last year for which we had actual data when we did the 2017 forecast, we had 4,695 students. We were projecting at that time that in 2022, 7 years hence, that we would have, I don't have that correct number here, but we were projecting that enrollment would decline by 83 students. A very small decline, but a significant one, a little less than 2%. The actual decline from 2016 to 2022 was 491 students, 10 times what we expected as the most likely decline, a 10% loss of student body to the district. The actual 2022 enrollment, which is the last number we have, we'll be looking to get our October 23 enrollment numbers fairly soon, and we'll be starting work, we think, on our next forecast. But the actual 2022 number was 4,204. Looking ahead 7 years, we project enrollment of 3,767 students, a decline again of over 400 students, 437 students fewer than we have today. Again, a decline of 10.4%. Now, we always put a little caveat at the end of our forecasts that says there's a number of things the users of this forecast should take into account. And the first one is that there are all sorts of uncertain futures that could occur. If you know anything about Alaska history, you know that Alaska history is just full of economically significant events that nobody or almost nobody predicted. And that goes way back to the 19th century. World War I, for example, caused a huge exodus of population from Alaska. And the Cold War created a huge influx of population. Oil was speculated that it would make some changes in Alaska. It completely redid Alaska. Same thing is true of Juneau's economy. So there's always the next big thing, if you will. But I think that one thing that it's hard to take into account, for people in your position or mine too, for that account, is that Juneau faces some very tough headwinds. The working age population is declining. Fertility rates are declining, which means we have fewer children per worker. And if you look at our forecasts in the last few years, we have plotted that decline. And the fact that that's true for many communities in Alaska, let's say most communities in Alaska, and for many in the United States, is no solace, because it means that we're unless something comes along that we're not expecting, that we need to face a future where there are fewer working people and more older people who will, in many respects, need support both medically and in other ways. So that's a summary. I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can. And maybe you could route them through Mr. Wall, because I have a hard time hearing any of the rest of you. Sorry about that, but that's the way it is.
Thank you, Mr. Erickson. And can you hear me any better now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We closed the windows. There was floatplane noise coming in through the windows, so maybe this will help. Ms. Glashevsky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me, Mr. Erickson?
Yes, I can.
Nice to see you. Thank you for coming. So you said you were doing 10-year forecasts with 3 scenarios, but then you stopped. But this memo, you must have been doing them in 2017 because it talks about a low, mid, and high case. So your numbers for 7 years on, did you do that 3 years ago? Or have you done it recently? And your projection from before was 2% loss and now it's 10% closer to what it was for in the other 10 years. So did you take that into account, or have you done one recently, or is this 7 year thing from 3 years ago? Because you mentioned
No,
7% or 10% decline in the next 7 years, and I just wondered if it was recently done or a while ago done.
that is from the forecast we submitted to the district in February of this year.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Good question, Ms. Gleason.
And if I could supplement that,
Mr.
so
Wall.
the Erickson Associates, they update it every year. So this is an annual report that's done with constantly updated forecasts. So there have been a forecast every year since 2017 through this year. We just didn't summarize those and go back and look at them. So yeah.
Okay. And then as you say, you learn from what you've done, so you probably have more confidence in the one you did this February than before. Yes? Is that fair?
I think that's fair. Well, but maybe it's unfair because back then we had the hubris, right? We thought we were pretty smart. But so now I think we're a little more humble. But yeah, it's the best number we could come up with. I think we're doing a better job now than we did back in 2013 when we started, or in 2017 when the last facilities plan was drafted. But an important caveat of our forecast is that, at least the most recent forecast, is that it assumes a steady state economy for Juneau. There are previous forecasts where we have said we need to apply some sort of economic adjustment factor to take account of what we think are trends in the economy. We haven't done that for the last several years, and as a consequence, our forecasts in the end are based entirely on the demographics of our student age population and the younger portion of the population who will be aging into school. And that basically says we're assuming the economy doesn't change. We have done a lot of analysis of the economy, but after we finish that, we really reached a conclusion that we're not in a position to forecast any big changes. And we feel pretty comfortable with that steady state forecast, but at least as far as it goes for the next year or so. But beyond that, who knows? I mean, there could be, you can imagine all sorts of strange scenarios where Juneau's economy goes off like a rocket or crashes. And we don't really have any basis to speculate about that.
Thank you.
Mr. Erickson, thank you, and that's not entirely comforting, but I appreciate your words.
Not comforting at all.
Madam Mayor.
Okay, maybe I'm just being stupid, but I don't see the forecast for this coming school year.
Well, we just didn't summarize it here.
Okay.
So
So what's his forecast for this school year?
did you hear that, Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, I could just let me pull it up here. The forecast for this school year is 4,191 students. And I read in the Empire that the September count was, I believe, 4,189. That would be remarkably accurate if it turns out to be similar to the October count, which is the official one. So it looks like we're pretty much on track to have something around 4,190 students at the October count.
Mr. Hauser, does that sound correct? Thank you. Super. Thank you. Madam Mayor, did you have any follow-up?
Nope, that was it.
I don't see any additional hands raised, so.
Great. Okay, so yeah, and I guess just to summarize that again, to say that caveat at the end, the steady state, and trying to think about what could happen if things weren't steady state, very difficult to put numbers on that. And we were asked to do that by CJ and kind of hit some dead ends pretty quickly. I was hoping that there were maybe some projections that JEDC had maybe done or other entities in town that would be thinking about that, and it appears like it's just too difficult. So hard to know. You know, I think a lot of us feel like, why doesn't everybody move to Juneau, right? And so I keep on thinking things will be different, but it's very hard to put any sort of analysis on that. Okay, so that's section 3, enrollment, to just kind of get some background on that. So section 4, the projected funding versus the operational expenditures. Again, this was a 2017 funding, and we didn't redo that. But what I thought was very interesting from the 2017 report was, and there was a good summary of that actually maybe just even read page 41 of the big report here, because there was an unexpected finding in that. And what had happened, there's a graph that was on page 42 of the big report. And what was expected was that the line of funding would intersect with the declining amounts that was coming back from the school or from the state because of declining enrollments. So they were thinking there was going to be a trigger point coming up where those two lines would intersect. And instead what was discovered is that that intersection didn't happen in the past, and that the budget was being supplemented to the tune of, there was a $2 million surplus that was reflected in the budget. And so the graph shown on page 42 was already showing that operation expenditures were exceeding above what was coming back from the state. And so there was not a trigger point that was coming up in the future. It had already happened in the past in 2017. Now we did not reanalyze the funding coming from the state, but I think it's been well talked about that it hasn't been keeping up. And so it's hard to imagine that that situation has gotten any better.
So can you say what this means? Because I was trying to look it up while you were saying it.
Right.
Can you say that what it means is that, like, we've already passed the point where we don't have enough money and we're just gonna keep having not enough money to a greater
I think that's a good summary.
degree?
I mean, and that's what we saw in 2017. Again, this was a draft report, and so I'm not 100% certain how much that had been vetted through the school district, or if there was comments that something had been missed, but that was the summary that you're seeing on page 41, was that the expectation was going to identify a trigger point coming up in the future. And instead, what was identified was that maybe that trigger point had come up in the past, that we had already exceeded the size of facilities for the students that we had based on operational costs.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Good information. Mr. Holst.
Yeah, I'd like just to add a little bit here, because I think I'm not really sure what Mr. Wall is concluding here. What the school district had and continues to have is projected ending fund balance, and in policy, ending fund balance. Right? The school district, by state law, there's a limit as to how much we can carry over from one year to another year. So if there's this notion, which I'm not sure that's what you were saying, but that there was like some savings, that we spent all our savings down, that's not the case. There may have been a $2 million ending fund balance, but the board has since policy limits or puts a target fund balance. That ends up being closer to $1 million. So the funding that we get is directly proportional to what the state agrees to, and that amount is less. I mean, if you just another way of just thinking about this is, we've cut, since I've been on the school district, 200 employees. Those 200 employees, if we maintained the funding level that we had, the 200 employees are like Coast Guard families, teachers, kids, and whatnot. This scenario here, declining population, would be less blue, right? Just that factor alone. And just like when we were talking about all of the amazing number of scenarios, if the schools were funded appropriately, or at least not appropriately, whatever, I think appropriate is the correct term, but funded how they at least have been funded in the past and kept up with sort of those levels of funding, we would still, I guarantee you, the school district would spend every penny of it to 1% on the kids, but we'd have a larger staff delivering those services. We would also have, without much speculation, more kids in the schools because those staff bring their families.
Yeah.
So those are part of the many scenarios that work against us in terms of funding. But I don't think that maybe you could restate what this concludes here. There isn't a savings that was spent out. It's just.
No. And I think the intent was, or what the expectation was that the graph that's shown on page 42, that the line of expenditures, operational expenditures, which is the top line, if people have that graph, would intersect with projected funding based on enrollment in the future. And instead, it intersected with it.
Madam Chair, Mr. Muldoon has his hand.
Oh, Mr. Muldoon, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk and Madam Chair. Yeah, I would just like to align myself briefly with Mr. Hulse's comments here is that I'm feeling a bit lost as to what we're trying to state here, and I'm not really seeing any work that's helping me understand that. And I also think when we discuss savings, we need to be explicit. Are we discussing district savings, borough savings, net between the two? Are we taking into consideration school size factors and things of that nature, which also impact our base student allocation and formula funding? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Muldoon. And I think that probably for members of the school board, this sort of triggers different thoughts and realizations than for members of the assembly. And I, at least, do not take this conversation as saying anything about the fund balance or the size or where it should be, and really not saying anything about any of the decisions. I think one of the factors in Mr. Erickson's boom and bust possibilities is that the state has been underfunding education for a very long time, and we all know that. And so I think that plays very heavily here as well. So thanks.
Yeah. And so I'm just highlighting what the finding was in the report, and I think, yes, absolutely, it should be interrogated. I will say, if you turn back to page 41, these are the calculations that were done for that graph. And so the amount of student-based allocation that was given to each school was based on the population, page 40, was based on the population of each school and the projection for how each school is going to decline. So it took the funding formula into account for each individual school based on that school's population, and then projected each school forward at a low, medium, and high projection, which is why we have those three lines. So there was a fair bit of math behind it beyond just a district-wide total or just multiply the students times a number from the state. It's actually a fairly complex formula that took into school size and the funding that was being given to each school individually.
And I don't want us to get too hung up
Sure.
here because
Yep.
we have a lot of material still to
Yes.
cover. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just to note, we've lost Mr. Erickson.
Okay, thank you.
And then, that's probably. So then section 5 was more of the architectural analysis, the stuff that Jensen Yorba Lot would have done at the time. So it was a facility as educational assessment. So it was looking at each individual building and assessing it for how it was fulfilling its educational mission and trying to come up with a score, a number, a simple way of explaining that. And so there was a number of things in this first summary that you're seeing, and there's a lot more information in here. This number, and we've ranked all the schools starting with Mendenhall River at 2.0 and going up to Harborview at 4.7. That's thinking about how the buildings are configured, what was the last time they were renovated, how much outstanding capital costs need to go into them, what is the population. There's a whole lot of things, and that I believe is summarized in the big matrix at the end.
And this is much of the information that we were trying to get a grasp on to populate our matrix, which is why we want to focus on ways of getting that matrix populated using this book, even though it's outdated at this point, but still has a wealth of information.
Right, and so because of all those different factors that was in there, we still think this is fairly relevant, but there are some things that have happened, of course, like the renovation, the new roof that went onto Zontaghini this summer, for example, and of course, all the renovations that happened out at Riverbend. So these numbers would juggle a little bit because some of the outstanding capital costs, capital improvements have been done, but the overall layout of all of the buildings has not changed since 2017. So I think some of this is still valid.
Ms. Glasgow.
Your quote, long-term viability matrix.
Yes.
That's on page
Yes.
18.
72 of the big report.
Your packet.
No, but it doesn't say what's in here. I mean, here's the matrix, but it says, it gives a number. How did you get the number?
Yes, and so there's everything that led up to that is in here. So first of all, there's quantitative and qualitative analysis of it. So looking at the buildings and saying,
But could you just tell me where in the report lists the things that are in the matrix, or are they listed somewhere, similar to this?
yeah,
Like,
so
I used XYZ. I just don't know where it is.
so it's summarizing this matrix, which is a number of different things. So it's the qualitative, looking at the numbers of what is outstanding in the CIP list versus.
But where are the
Page-
factors?
The
that make
pages
up the
that
number?
precede
Page
that matrix.
45 gives you the 6 categories of assessment.
Page 45.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And then some of it is also going to be coming from the CIP list, which follows afterwards, because I think the pages that are before are mostly sort of not the numbers based. It's the analysis of looking at the buildings. Is there enough small group spaces? Are there enough administrative spaces? Is there a yard around the building? All of those sort of factors were things that we analyzed to give a number. And those are the 3 numbers that I pulled out later in the second paragraph under that section 5, or the third paragraph. So again, this is a examination of the physical layout of the school, separate from what's outstanding on the CIP list or what needs to be improved just to keep the facility operating as it is. And so these things are things that are difficult to overcome.
So this is the point that Mr. Holst raised a meeting or two ago when he talked about the difference between Floyd Dryden and Zontaghini and how spaces can be transformed in one but not in the other. That's the
Yes.
kind of thing you're talking about.
Yeah, and
Yes.
also with those 2 buildings, the fact that at Zontaghini you have lots of access to daylight in every classroom. There's lots of windows in every classroom. At Floyd Dryden, the concrete walls have very limited punch openings. So the access to daylight for the students is not near as good at Floyd Dryden as at Zontaghini.
Right.
So that's one of the factors in the long-term viability matrix, is things like that.
Okay, I see the actual matrix things are here in these pages, 56, 57, 58,
Mhm.
which is super different than what we came up with, because we just made it up of professionals. Where
Right.
you're architects and you made the things about, can you make the space flexible and can you, et cetera.
Which is
Your matrix is very different than our matrix.
which is why, as we move towards the end of the year, why Ms. Kester and I, as we're talking, realize that perhaps what we do is we take the matrix we came up with, which has a lot of qualitative considerations, different considerations, and we worked with Jensen Yorba to actually populate that matrix, basically pulling information from both the work that we've done and this report so that we could hand that off to the next committee.
Yeah, that'd be great. I have not seen that. So I haven't seen what you guys came up with
Oh.
that would be different than what.
Very different. I mean,
Oh.
the next committee could take this and make one out of it, because this is very architecturally
Right.
But I'm-
focused. Do the windows open? Can you move the spaces?
Right.
Is it light? We basically had none of that in ours.
Okay, yeah.
We have, is the space used fully? And how often is the space used? It might be used 1 hour a day, or maybe used 8 hours a day. Anyway, very different.
So there is a.
I just want to keep this moving though.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay, sorry, but I will
I'm
say
just
there,
looking at the time.
Yep.
We'll go past 1, but I don't want to go too far past 1.
the only thing I'll say in that 55%, 65, 67%, where we talk about the 3 schools, those are things that are hard to fix, right? So you could imagine that you just use a room differently and that maybe changes some of the matrix. You can update a roof and that changes the amount that's on your CIP list, but it's very difficult to give Marie Drake a usable site, a usable exterior site. It's very difficult to put a gym or commons onto Mendenhall River. And so that's reflected in these last numbers, and that's why we pulled those out just to highlight them. And so that's what we said in the takeaway at the end, is a one sentence takeaway that Marie Drake, Mendenhall River, and Floyd Dryden are at the bottom of the facility assessment list for reasons that may be expensive or impossible to correct, just as something put into your minds. So section 6, the energy use, there was a lot of information there and a lot of recommendations on what could be improved. There was no big takeaway on it, so we didn't review it or really even summarize this. The capital improvement project in section 7, a lot of work has been done on that list already, but we do note that there were some big projects that have not been undertaken at Mendenhall River and Marie Drake. And then design capacity in section 8. This is, again, was a snapshot in 2017. We modified it a little bit to the time charter was not in JDHS, so we moved that program over to give the summary that's happening on page 4. And as I'm sure you're aware, there's many different ways to think about capacity of a school building. We thought the most valuable was the PTR evaluation, where you're looking at each educational space, multiplying it times the school district's PTR. So imagining that each classroom was filled to capacity according to the school district's targets of pupil to student rate or pupil to teacher ratios, as opposed to just a pure square footage analysis, which is what the Department of Ed does. That's that first column. So that's why we bolded the PTR capacity. And then you see the 2017 actual and the difference going down the side. And again, some things to just note on that is that it does have charter school in JD. It does have Montessori in Marie Drake. And so then just the capacity takeaway, that there was excess capacity in 2017, that the buildings were at 82%.
Have we lost Mr. Muldoon?
No, he's still on.
Okay.
He just has turned off his video and his sound.
Thank you.
But of course, there's this important caveat that balancing overall district capacity with individual building layouts, grade divisions, separate program needs, and geographic boundaries is very complex. And the other thing that we would say is that there was no analysis done of admin. So admin tended to fill up a lot of the spaces in the district buildings. IT happening here, some district community schools happening at Thunder Mountain, for example, and none of that analysis occurred in 2017, which seems like that was a myth, that, was something that was missed.
Mr. Holst.
And if I could just conceptually for the assembly members, when we have declining budgets or budgets that are flat, since most of the funds are spent on teachers, the pupil-teacher ratio gets higher. So it appears, and it would show, if we had the class sizes that we wanted, we have less capacity. But as we get less funding, it shows that we have more capacity because we have more kids in each classroom. Just to keep that in mind. So it's not linear. One next to the other. Yes.
And Mr. Muldoon, we have opened the window, so let us know if it's hard to hear.
And in section 9, there was a fair bit of work done just talking about where boundaries should be divided, and we didn't do that. So that was just a summary of what had been done. And then what we tried to do was take our conclusion back on page 5, back to the executive summary that was the beginning of this report, and then update or suggest some possible ways forward. Because what we noted was that it seemed like this report got to the point of some difficult decisions, and then that's where it ended. And so we tried to maybe provide some ways forward, and I don't know, should we go through those? Okay.
No, Chair Hale.
Oh, yeah.
I think maybe I will preface going through these suggestions because we've had a lot of questions, and I've already brought it up that one of the things that we've been talking about, Ms. Kester and I, is actually trying to use the information, modify our matrix, and then populate the matrix from the information. So that just plays into, I think because this didn't get completed in 2017, I don't think it behooves us to throw another $100,000 at updating all the numbers. But what I do foresee is the ability to slap a couple cover sections on it and then finalize it with that cover information. So I'll just preface what you have to say with that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And there may be, so the first bullet item is just updating the report, and it may be more beneficial to just update a few portions of this, because maybe we did get that graph wrong. And maybe there's something about that that's misleading, and we should focus on something like that. Maybe that's beneficial, or maybe not. Maybe the whole thing should just be a snapshot of 2017 and we can build on it. Then the next was creation of an economic forecast model, which details out pure financial costs of different facility options. So imagine, just to throw out a scenario, that you have Marie Drake and we renovate it, or we don't renovate it, or we tear it down, right? There's 3 options there that you could actually just hire somebody to an economic forecast of what that would cost. The cost of tearing it down, the cost of repairing it, the cost of doing nothing versus the maintenance and the staffing of that building moving into the future, purely on an economic basis, just numbers. So talk to Raincoast Data about that. You know, there's certainly economic modeling that can be done for every option, just purely from an economic. So maybe that's a helpful data point that we can get. And then examination of the areas required for administration and other functions which are taking up space in the district building, because that seems like a miss on the capacity issue, that we just haven't really looked at that, you know, and also the other facility being the old dairy building, that we just haven't looked at that as part of district facilities. And I'm not sure why that was done in 2017. And then I think this goes to your point about the creation of a more comprehensive school facilities matrix for facility evaluation, which combines this long-term viability that we came up with other data points. Other qualitative and quantitative variables identified in that, I think, in the memo that maybe is even part of your packet. But there's lots of other things to think about, and maybe we could start to bring those other things in and come up with a matrix that helps you evaluate those facilities better than what had been done previously. And then try and figure out if there's a planning project that could be done that looks at these facilities in a community-wide basis. Are there things that we could imagine the community doing with these buildings, maybe even just temporarily, that is something that we should, again, put into the matrix of thinking about? Another planning project that goes beyond just looking at the individual buildings and taking this back to a community-wide thought process. And then finally, I think what we didn't do, that we did a lot of evaluation as architects, as educational planners, but we were not a public process expert. And so finding somebody that could help guide this process through what is probably going to be a fairly complex public discussion and an emotional one for a lot of people about closing down or changing grades or even changing district boundaries. There's lots of things that this might be difficult, and it might be helpful to get somebody that really can put a public process together beyond what we often do, that, you know, we put up plans and put up the sticky notes, and we can do that pretty well. But this is, maybe there's a public process to bring the public and the decision makers together for discussion and exploration and determine how to develop a consensus on these difficult issues moving forward, which, you know, feels like it's gonna be quantitative and qualitative all mixed together somehow. So those were our suggestions.
Ms. Glashow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would agree with your comment about spending a lot of time updating this. I agree with you that it's probably not worth it. I'm so happy it got found, because there's some great stuff in here. You know, our matrix is nothing like this matrix, but you can make a matrix with ours plus this, and then you have something pretty good, it seems like. You know, and I'm very interested in the childcare thing. You know, if we've got space, we've got a huge childcare need. This is a place for kids already. Anyway, I mean, that to me seems like a great path to go down. So I hope that the next committee, it starts with this bullets and looks at our matrix and actually starts the analysis straight off. So we're not thinking around.
I would actually advocate something a step more than that, which is actually hire out the population of the matrix and have whoever is working on it, work with the school district, and actually do that work for the committee, because trying to do that kind of work in committee or asking our very, very busy staff is really difficult. So that would help the committee start.
I agree.
Further.
I mean, the committee can't do it, someone else has to do it.
Thank you.
Committee can read it and say, well, you forgot this thing.
And so we are morphing into the next steps, which is item G4, but that's a good thing because I think it's time to be morphing into the next steps. Does anyone on the committee have follow-up at this point? I do have a couple other thoughts about the bulleted items on page 13 of the agenda. No one has any other comments.
My only, in listening to all of this, one of the things which is really not so much about this, but like when you talk about, the icebreaker coming to town and I know that the city, I know that the school district, I know that JPD and corrections and the fire department all have positions that they can't fill, and they can't get people here because there's no place to live. And so, I mean, those two, we'd like to have more students, yeah, but we can't even get people to come here to teach the people that we've got because they can't find any place.
100%.
And so, I mean, it is like a catch-22. And we are all caught.
I 100% agree, Ms. Sorensen, and housing has been, I would say, the top priority for the assembly in the last year, and we will go into our retreat, I think, in early December. I fully expect housing to be number one and childcare to be number two. And I think the assembly has been learning, and we are doing some things, but we need to do more. So I'm 100% with you on that. I think that's a huge solution to a lot of the problems that we have. Are there any other notes? Mr. Hauser, thank you so much for being here. I know you have a place. Thank you so much. This is yours.
If you wanted to use it.
No, I have it somewhere, I just don't know where.
I wanted to also bring attention, Mr. Holst.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, I appreciate Ms. Lesevsky's comments at the city.
You're good. I respond to anything
I
posted.
should know that. It should roll off my tongue by now. The childcare, the school district isn't so much interested in childcare, but they're keenly interested in early education, high quality early education. And that's been a part of our recent strategic plan and our previous one. And we have increased the availability of childcare in almost in every one of our elementary schools. And our invited Head Start into our program because it aligns consistent with our long-term goals as a community, as well as just the obvious reality that we have some space and these spaces are designed for education purpose. So I really like, I think whatever next steps should be, continue to look at the most compatible uses of our buildings that align with community goals, which would be childcare. So and I did check with the childcare licensing office just to be sure, because I was at a conversation with Mayor Weldon a few days ago about were there some limitations about putting a private childcare in a public building. Apart from getting an okay from the Department of Education, I haven't been able to find any obstacle. Meaning, were we to choose to identify space, it does seem that it is an option. I'm sure we'll look at the fine details, but it is an option to say 3 classrooms in this building are available, and these could be used by a childcare operator. It's doable with some work.
The place that it gets dicey is the bathrooms, because that is the bathrooms have to be, like within 6 inches, I mean, not exactly, but that Cassie could probably speak better to that. That has been the, one of the conundrums for even, like thinking about converting space over time.
Yes, and I will just add, when I bring up housing and childcare, I'm just saying that if we want young families to be here and we can provide housing for them, but we don't
Right.
have childcare, we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
Well, right, and it would be nice if our schools had, had been ever designed with the idea that, it
Yes.
wasn't a half a block to a bathroom. Right. Because that's what was cheapest at the time. Obviously, it was designed to be childcare, but, right, we can modify it.
So that's right.
Modify, yes, we can do bathrooms.
That's right. So I am going to bring us to the final bullet, which is creation of a process to bring options to the public and decision makers for discussion and exploration. I think that one of the things that's been unfortunate about this committee is that we've done a lot of work, despite what some people might think. We've done a lot of work and we've really moved the ball forward on this question, and nobody knows about it. And one of the things that I advocate as part of the instruction to the next committee, in fact, I'm writing on my turn in my head post-election, is we've got to get this into the public conversation because it's not. And Mayor Weldon, I have a couple more things to add to that, and then I will call on you. I actually have here language that I will pass around. And this is language that talks about who makes the decision to close a school. It is not the assembly, it is the school board. And so that's even more reason for this to be part of the public conversation. So I think that's another very important thing. Mayor Weldon, on to you.
I was just thinking that perhaps you and Ms. Sorensen should get together on action line or something like that rather than doing my turn.
That's great.
So because if you talk about facts and stuff, my turns are typically viewed as opinions rather than factual information. And if you guys talk together and write your own scripts, because that's what I've been finding lately. I think you guys get better information out there.
I think it's a great idea, and that might also get more of the news media picking up on this so that they attend meetings, which I know is hard for them. Okay. That I appreciate that. I think we're actually at items for action G4, which is the next steps. Ms. Kester, do you want to kind of help shape this conversation a little more?
Yeah, so under action items, we really have as a bullet point solidifying the next steps of the conversation that the body just had about the 6 bullet points on page 13. So any formal motion or formal direction will give staff the ability to work between now and when the next iteration of this committee convenes to really get the committee launching on some of that direct analysis.
Do we have any motion from committee members? Ms. Bonichuk, you are so reliable with motions.
So on page 20, it talks about recommendation drafted matrix and framework for future committee work. I would say that we forward our memo from September 26th and ask the next committee to consider that, as well as that stuff on page whatever that was from your matrix.
You mean that facility matrix?
Yeah,
The table.
now, when I find that report, it was before you pointed me to a 6 bullet thing on here somewhere. I should have kept my. There was a matrix that had the actual lines in it. Mr. Wall, do you know what I'm talking about?
You mean?
I'm talking about this. Facilities master planning on pages, I assume it's all the same for different schools, page 56 to 66. This was your matrix and the things in your list. And I would suggest that the committee look at this and see, how to combine this with the matrix that we came up with. Because our matrix is very more qualitative and it's really more focused on policy than on
does it have windows, multiple teaching and display, small group collaboration, technology accessible everywhere, movable furniture? I mean, this is a very different list, and maybe the next step is to combine this list and our list and see what matrix should be, what the matrix should be. I mean, is that,
Mr.
I mean, I
That's your motion.
well, that's,
I mean,
it's not my yes, but I'm explaining my motion and I'll make it clearer if people think it's what I mean.
Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, that's what I come with. I agree that the matrix, getting the matrix put together is probably the biggest next step I think this committee should focus on. Because what I conclude from this exercise is not that next year or the year after we need to close the school, but that if no economic changes occur in our community, we don't build housing, basically, we can't figure out how to build more housing, then in a few years, we'll be faced with a decision about how to best use these facilities. And I think it's the most valuable part of this conversation versus when I was involved in this exercise here was that we are talking about how do our future selves make that decision. So I think that should be the focus because we're not concluding, you know, in our my turn or on the radio that, hey, community, we're going to close a school next year, get ready for it. Because I don't think that the data doesn't tell us we're there yet. But it does say if Erickson's projections, which are based on, you know, we know how he and demography do it. In 5 years, with 500 fewer students, yeah, it's probably likely that the decision will be made. So I think the matrix is the key scenario. It's going to be up to the school board to say, you know, Mayor Weldon, if I can just mention her, I think she's been clear that like Marie Drake she doesn't view as a good investment for city dollars going forward. I think the school board needs to, well, we know, thank you for this, but the school board will get to that in a few years if there is no increased population. They're going to point to the building that they think is least useful for educational purposes with the benefit of a matrix. And then that'll trigger the investing in, what does it take to tear down that building or not. But I don't see any scenario, I don't see in the next couple of years, there's no data that says we're shutting down the school. So I like the matrix. I think that's what we should focus on, building out a new matrix so that future decision makers are clear on how to go about making this decision.
So I'd be happy to just forward our matrix. I'm just suggesting that this is actually also good. And that I think the combination of the two could be good. We don't have time to evaluate our matrix versus this matrix right now because I didn't even know about it. Sorry. I did get this, but I didn't find page 55. Anyway, so it's actually on page 55. So the motion would be forward to the next committee, our draft facility evaluation matrix as from your memo, along with page 55 of this report, and have them look at those two and see if our matrix can be beefed up with this matrix.
Are there any conversation or objections? I would hope, I would add to forward the entire report. I think there's much that is of great value in that entire report. But I might turn to city manager. Are you city manager yet? To be, or city manager
Almost city
Kester, almost city manager Kester, and pose the question. And I pose it to all of you as well. Would it be of more benefit, do you think, for that committee to start with this, which is detailed information and really hard to kind of grok, and the help of some kind of consultant to help merge those and populate them? Or would it be more helpful to actually start doing some of that merging and forward that information, but actually have the new committees hit the ground running a little bit more with, here's a draft, let's take a look at what this might do for us, pulling the information from that starting on page 55 into our matrix and pulling some of the information from the report into our matrix. So the question is for all of us and to the maker of the motion as well, would you consider that, Ms. Glaszewski, and what do you think of that
So I see two scenarios. One would be starting off the next committee with a merged matrix, right? That proposes new categories that are based on both documents. I would foresee using Jensen Riverwald to help merge that since you guys are the experts. And then you would start with a longer memo and some backstory on how we got to that memo. The second scenario would be actually populating some of that matrix, which would be, of course, a heavier lift that would just require more consultant support and, of course, support from the school district in populating that matrix. So I think that either way, the work needs to be done to merge those two documents so that when the committee starts, they're not, looking in the weeds, right? They have a nice succinct document to start from. The real question is there value at this point in populating the matrix, or if the conversation is still, on the theoretical level of what are our categories and what should we be thinking about, then maybe that, which is a much larger workload, is not something that the committee would like to task staff with between now and then. Does that make sense, those two scenarios that I'm asking you to consider?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense to make a effort to merge the physical aspects that are here. And there's some things I'm sure that need to be updated, like there's a variety of new rooms since 20, it seems like 1 or 2 a year since then, different things that have happened. But the physical plant things, I mean, I'm pretty sure we haven't changed any windows. So, I mean, those are, and the, how spaces can be utilized. Those are important pieces to be considered. And I think we have most of those here. And we have other areas of other qualitative pieces that are in the other one. So it seems like parts of it could get populated. I mean, if they're, or, could, be there to be populated relative to the physical aspects. So, I mean, a new committee would certainly feel like they had more to hang on to than we did when we started. Some sort of direction and information. I mean, I feel like we kind of all started with a blank sheet of paper.
Yeah. And
fortunately, we had Brian's memory of, I think we did this. I did. It just seems really familiar to me.
And I think that, I think it will be important, and this will be in the memo, to provide the information that Mr. Holst is saying, this is a framework, as we've talked all along, for how to reach that decision. And by the way, it's the school board that makes the decision. So this joint committee is really, really important for that decision as well. I really see that as important because we certainly have calls from the community. Your enrollment's going down, put City Hall in one of the schools, close one of the schools. And we need to be talking to the community about that. And that is the vehicle for doing that.
I also think that another piece of this, and again, jumping on the point that Brian made here recently, is that, and I think this is what he was talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, I know you won't have any difficulty doing it. If there's a possibility, if we have space, creating childcare options in school buildings that have space, then, particularly if they're, our school buildings are quite broadly distributed. So they might be more convenient locations than trying to have all things in, let's just say, for example, that, I mean, the one of the buildings that's on the bottom of the list here is Mendenhall River. That's not really a convenient childcare location for most of Juneau. So if there's some way that we can spread that around in our existing buildings, well, that we can all use them happily, that would be good. So maybe we need to have some investigation
we're kind of back full circle to almost a year ago.
Well, some investigation into how that could potentially happen and what those pieces are.
Just to note, we just lost Mr. Muldoon.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. That's excellent. I am looking to the maker of the motion to see,
Do you want me to clarify, or
yes.
regarding this, of course, I would like to forward this. I mean, is that what you were suggesting?
No,
I
my
don't know.
suggestion is that we actually do some work before that committee meets to start merging them and start populating them and take
Oh,
that.
have us do it, have them meet again.
No, have Jensen Yorba Wall do that on contract so that they can actually be doing some of that work before the committee meets. Ms. Wallace.
I appreciate that, and I am thinking politically about the reality that would need a budget. We can't make that decision here, and you're gonna have, or can we? Okay, sorry, I was assuming we had to allocate funding, in which case I would push it until we have a new assembly.
Okay, I'll just, my motion would be to move that we forward to the next committee. I assume we're not meeting again, correct?
No, I don't intend to.
Okay, our matrix, our words from your memo, plus page 55 of the old report, and suggest that the next committee look at that and see if they want to merge them in some way.
Okay, that's your motion. That's your motion. We don't second. But Ms. Wall posed a question, and I'd like City Manager Kester to answer that question, please.
Thank you. So any work that we did with Jensen Overall, I think would be reasonable to fund from deferred maintenance. It's certainly a deferred maintenance conversation that we're having. The original draft, 2017 draft, was funded directly by CBJ. I believe it was about $250,000 appropriation, of which over $100,000 went back into deferred maintenance when the project was closed. Of course, a very expensive large project I wouldn't recommend doing that with, but I would ask Mr. Wall for a fee proposal and see if there was something reasonable that we could do with a minimal amount of funding. But that is how I would propose to fund any work that was done between now and then.
And to me, it's a question of, does the next committee want to look at this and look at this list and look at that list and go combine them? Or do you want staff to look at the two lists and combine them? I don't have a big opinion, but I assume the next committee would want to do that. Am I wrong on this? Nodding their head.
I am going to have to call the question because I made a suggestion and you didn't take it, so we'll call the question then. Do we forward the report and the matrix, calling out the information beginning on page 55 to the next committee with the suggestion that they move forward with that and the other suggestions that we made? I can't remember them all. Ms. I guess that's the question, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Gladys.
Any objection?
Oh, we have an objection.
No, I said, are there any objections?
Are there any
before
objections? Thank you. Thank you. Are there any objections? I object for the purposes that I've said. That's all. I have a counter proposal.
I'm just not, excuse me, but I don't know what you were suggesting. That's not this. So that's why I'm not trying to ignore your thing. Anyway.
What I am suggesting is that we direct staff to do some preliminary work to bring those two matrices together to help that next committee. That's all.
And so now we're on with the
question.
vote.
Yes.
Okay, so on Ms. Gladys motion, Ms. Gladys.
Yes.
Ms. Wall.
Yes.
Mr. Holst.
Yes.
Ms. Sorensen.
I need some clarification. Is this to put them together before the next committee, or to just have these two things like they are
Just
today?
the two things.
Send them to the next committee for them to decide.
Mayor Wilson
Yes.
and Ms. Hill.
Are you gonna vote?
We have 4 yeas and 2 nays, so motion
Nice try.
passes. So everybody, yes, excellent.
I didn't know that. I just showed up for fun.
I think the next item on the agenda, thank you for making that motion, Ms. Gladys. I think the next item on the agenda is committee member comments.
I just had one last comment.
Yeah.
That's okay. Just in terms of, and this, we don't have to write this down, but for city manager, mayor, I do feel, I love that we've been thinking proactively about the future and planning out for future decisions. I think that's great and should be in charge of the committee. But as a newer assembly member, I would say it's still very, like, one of the reasons I wanted to join this group is, you know, when we did the budget every year, I get this thing and I say, oh my God, $154 million. I want to do something to help. And I don't want to be, you know, when we talk about CIP, when we talk about legislative priorities, when we talk about our debt capacity, I would like this committee to be helping inform the assembly on what we do in the short term. So if there are projects here that we don't want to put money in because we still have to make future decisions, that's fine. But if there are other things in here that we should be capitalizing, I feel like this group should be a place that helps assembly get there in concert with the school board.
We could actually use that as a motion to forward that request to the next committee. Are there any objections? Mayor Walden.
And just to hammer on the childcare, Ms. Wall said you're looking future out. We're not looking for future out for the childcare. We're looking for next year.
Yeah.
So you guys might want to look at that a little quicker.
Does somebody, I mean, so it gets on a piece of paper, does someone want to make a motion about childcare? Or are we gonna just assume that the next committee?
We are, excuse me, we are first,
Made a motion.
seeing if there were any
She made a
objections.
motion.
Oh, yeah, we, motion, appeared there were none. You could just throw that motion out, Mayor Weldon, for the next committee to talk about childcare in the immediate term.
Sure.
Are there any objections?
What's the motion?
For the committee to,
To look for childcare spaces in the next coming school
in the schools.
year. In the schools.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? I want to thank you all for all the hard work. It's a gnarly topic, as we all know. I really, really appreciate the good faith from everyone in participating in this. Thank you. And at 1:28, we are adjourned.
That might.
2 minutes.
I know, it's pretty good. Is it still recording?
Is this yours?